Hello there, good evening Africa. Welcome to our premiere edition of the show Bottomline Africa. Each day of the week between Monday and Thursday, we will be helping you make sense of the main events as they happen across the 54 states in the continent. Thank you for joining us. My name is Yusuf Ibrahim, and in the next 60 minutes or so, we'll traverse the continent to bring you the top stories. Plus, we'll have conversations about the electoral processes in the continent and how they contribute to strengthening democracy. But first, a quick look at Africa in 60 seconds. A United Nations investigations team wants criminal action taken against the Nkurunziza regime for war crimes. Several employees of Acacia Mining to be sent home as the firm scales down its operations in Tanzania. South Africa's Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa admits to an extramarital affair after his email was allegedly hacked. And Africa reacts to Kenya's Supreme Court decision to nullify the August presidential election. Hello there and welcome once again. If you're just joining us, the program begins right now. We have our reporters in various countries in Africa. We have Solomon Serawanja in Uganda. Eugene Anangwe is going to join us shortly from Kigali, that is in Rwanda. And then we're going to have a Skype interview with Dr. Fred Goloba. Mutebi is going to join us also from Rwanda. Now, on our Twitter poll tonight, we're asking you, are you confident that electoral outcomes in Africa reflect the popular will of the people? Let me just take that again. Are you confident that electoral outcomes in Africa reflect the popular will of the people? You know the drill. Our Twitter handle is @KTN News. You can as well tweet me at Yusuf Ibra using the hashtag Bottomline Africa. And I'm definitely going to go through some of your feedback shortly within this program. But first things first, top on our program tonight. In Rwanda, police have detained one of President Paul Kagame's fierce critic, Diana Rwigara, following investigations into suspected tax evasion and forgery. Last Tuesday, officers raided a family home at the upscale suburb of Kiyovu in the capital, Kigali. Police spokesman Theos Badege was quoted as saying preliminary investigations were being conducted before a case could be opened against Rwigara and her family. The 35-year-old opposition figure was being investigated for alleged use of forged signatures during her presidential bid. She was disqualified from the August 4th election, which President Kagame won with a landslide victory. Shortly after her disqualification, Rwanda's Parti Social threatened legal action against her, accusing her of using its list of members as part of the signatures she submitted to the Electoral Commission in a quest for presidency. Of course, our reporter Eugene Anangwe is going to join us shortly and tell us more on the situation there, whether that arrest was politically instigated or whether it's just a normal arrest, because reports indicate that she was not arrested alone. She was arrested together with her mother as well as her daughter. Now, before we cross over to our next story, I'm told Eugene is ready now. Eugene, good evening. We've seen that report that Diana, a key political figure in Rwanda, has been arrested. Reports indicate that she was arrested because of evading tax. What more can you tell us? Is this arrest some sort of instigated politically?
Well, good to be on the program now. Just to bring it to speed on this whole drama, because in Rwanda, what has been happening over the past 1 week on social media platforms is nothing short of a soap opera. Looking at today's event when the police did raid the Rwigara's family, because, you know, over the past 4 days on Twitter, the Rwigaras have been saying that Diana had been detained illegally by police, that she was missing and no one knew where she was, and that she had been taken in by the police. This was before today. But the Rwanda National Police did come out with a statement at least 2 or 3 days ago and categorically said that they did not have her in their custody. They had not arrested her. Because interestingly, we also have international journalists who had even started reporting that Rwigara was missing. And there's even been some petitions that were going around for people to sign to push President Paul Kagame's government and his police officers to release Diana Rwigara. Now, what happened today is that the police did wait for Diana and her family at the CID headquarters because they had been expected, they had been called to come to answer to some questions concerning, suspicion over tax evasion through their family company and also forgery, and you rightly put it, concerning the election process, which did not manage to go through. And so the police wanted to actually clear the air on this issue because they said we do not have her in our custody. So they decided to go directly to her home and try to show the world that, look, the narrative that is being created outside that this lady and her family have been held by us is actually not true. So the police did take alongside them a battery of journalists to go and witness and, record all the spectacle that took place. And after knocking the gate without having someone opening the gate, they did force their way in through a ladder, which they jumped over the fence, opened the gate, allowed in more police officers to get into the home, into the house. And upon opening the house, they did search through the house and they found Diana Rwigara and her family members inside the house in the kitchen. And this is where they were told that they had to go with the police officers so that they could be able to be, ask the questions that the police wants to know from them concerning the tax evasion claims and the forgery claims. And she did confront the officers, and she said that you did take our money, all of it, and also confiscated our mobile phones. So how did you expect us to come to the police station? But that is not the bone of contention here. The issue here is, why send a narrative that you have been arrested by police and also tweet through your social media account that you have gone missing, call on the world to actually push for your immediate release, yet you are actually holding yourself inside your house? This is what is actually suspicious here. And so the narrative of trying to show the world that she had been detained illegally is what the police did burst that particular bubble today.
Eugene, one final question. Of course, those who are saying that this arrest will have an effect on Rwanda's democracy, or how Rwanda is seen out there in the eyes of the international community. And there are those who are questioning the arrest. Why is it happening now, immediately Rwanda observed the election on August 4th?
On the contrary, I think it's an egg on the face of those who wanted, particularly Rwigara herself, and those who were actually sending or creating the narrative that she had been illegally detained, that she was actually in police custody when she was not. This is actually what is the story right now. It's no longer about the democracy or anything. The story today is, why was she lying that she had been detained by police, yet she had locked herself up in the house together with her family members? This is actually a story. And we've also heard of some of the top journalists who had already reported on this, some international journalists who had reported on this, saying that she had been illegally detained by the president's officers, saying that they are ready to actually apologize, for running such a story. So today what is actually going on is questions around, why was she doing this? Was it to discredit the government of Rwanda? Was it to gain political mileage, or what? These are the questions that probably the police will be trying to investigate out here.
Thank you very much, Eugene, for that update. Of course, that was Eugene Anangwe coming to us all the way from Kigali, Rwanda, after that dramatic arrest of Diana Rwigara, a key political figure in Rwanda. She's also a rights activist. We're getting reports that she was arrested together with her mother and her daughter on grounds that she evaded tax. Of course, that's a story that we're still following for you, and Eugene is going to give us more updates. Now, let's cross over to neighboring Burundi, where United Nations Commission of of Inquiry has recommended that Burundian officials at the highest level should be held accountable for crimes against humanity committed in Burundi since April 2015. And a list of suspects has been drawn up. The Commission said there were reasonable grounds to believe that crimes against humanity had been committed in the country since April 2015, when President Pierre Nkurunziza said he will ask a new term in office, triggering a descent into chaos and violence. According to the Commission, the intelligence service, the police and the army are widely responsible for these crimes, which were a part of the Burundi state's policy. Burundi's ambassador to the United Nations has dismissed the report as part of an international conspiracy against the country.
The Commission reached the conclusion that a certain number of serious human rights violations have been committed in Burundi since April 2015. Among these violations are arrests and detentions, acts of torture and other cruel, inhumane or degrading treatments, extrajudicial executions, rapes and other sexual violence, as well as enforced disappearances. At the end of its investigations, the Commission can conclude that there are reasonable grounds for believing that most of these serious human rights violations constitute crimes against humanity. The acts of the Commission documented under the Article 7 of the Rome Statute, which is applicable law in this situation, these acts as judged by the Commission were perpetrated in the frame of generalized or systematic attack against the civilian population, with the knowledge that such an attack was being undertaken, and these acts are besides also part of a policy of the state of Burundi. The potential authors of these acts are mainly to be found among the members of the intelligence service of Burundi National Police and of the National Defense Force of Burundi Army. To these presumed authors must be added members of the League of the ruling party, the CNDD-FDT.
The one thing that strikes you most forcibly is that as long as impunity continues, so do human rights violations and the commission of international crimes. The fight against impunity, including in Burundi, has to be the top priority.
Now from Burundi, let's cross over to Gabon, where opposition leaders have condemned a government ban on them leaving the country. A spokesman for the Interior Ministry said the move followed what he described as inflammatory remarks by the opposition leader, Jean Ping. Last week, the authorities said members of the opposition who refused to recognize the government could no longer appear on state media. Ping narrowly lost to the incumbent, Ali Bongo, in last year's presidential election. He alleged fraud and said he should have been sworn in as head of state. A number of demonstrations have been held in support of Ping in cities around the country, leading to numerous arrests and clashes with police in the capital and the seaport of Port Gentil. In August, Ping called on the Gabonese to rise up as one to solemnly mark his rise to power.
Ali is calling for a dialogue. Can you call people to a dialogue with guns, with helicopter, with jet fighter, you know, with a gun to killing, jailing everybody? Is it what? Is it a dialogue? And for what? With whom is going to dialogue? For what? So we said clearly that we refuse such a dialogue. We say that if a dialogue should be organized, it should be under the one who win the election. And we are ready to do that with everybody, you know, and to go as far as possible to make Gabon a stable and viable state.
Now, Egypt and Kenya have been invited to the 2017 BRICS summit being hosted by China. The two African countries are among 5 countries, including Tajikistan, Mexico and Thailand, invited as guests to the annual conference. The September 3rd to 5th summit is being held in Xiamen City. The leaders of the BRICS grouping of emerging economies said in a joint statement that they strongly deplore North Korea's latest nuclear test and hydrogen bomb claim, which has overshadowed the 5-nation group's annual summit. Now, BRICS is made up of Brazil, Russia, India, South Africa, and summit host China. Now, North Korea's longtime patron. Now, the summit includes Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Presidents Vladimir Putin of Russia, Michael Temer of Brazil, and South Africa's Jacob Zuma. BRICS nations comprise more than 40% of humanity. The grouping came together a decade ago to advocate for the developing world's interest. Now, UK-based mining firm Acacia has announced that it has reduced operations and cut its workforce in Tanzania following an export ban on gold and copper concentrate imposed by the government in March last year. It said in a statement that the move had forced it to reduce the workforce from the current 1,200 employees and 800 contractor roles. The company said that the ban had led to a negative cash flow of approximately $15 million per month and made operations at one of its mines, Bulyanhulu, unsustainable. Acacia operates 3 gold mines in Tanzania, in Bunyahulu, Buzwagi, and North Mara. In July, the Tanzanian government hit the company with a demand for $190 billion in unpaid taxes. President John Magufuli has been pushing for changes in the mining industry because he says he does not believe the country is getting a fair share of profit from the industry.
Siwezi nikasimama pale mbele nione wizi huu unaofanyika nikakai kimya, nitaulizwa siku ya mwisho wangu. Madhahabu haya si mengi, si ningesema na mimi nisafishie kule likakae huko Ulaya. Kwani waliokuwa na shusha percentage mpaka 0 unafikiri walikuwa nafanya bure? Hawakujali maisha ya Watanzania, walijali maisha yao. Tuliahidi kuwafanyizia kazi wa Tanzania, na Watanzania wanahitaji maendeleo bila kujali vyama vyetu. Na ndio maana nawapongeza sana viongozi wa vyama mbalimbali mliokuja hapa na ambao kwa wingi viongozi wa vyama vingine vyote wamekuwa supportive. Hizi fedha zikienda hospitalini haziendi kwa wana CCM tu.
Tanzanian president there speaking. Now, a leading figure in South Africa's ruling African National Congress Party, that is ANC, has distanced herself from being behind the hacking of Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa's emails, which showed that he was having extramarital affairs. Now, Ramaphosa has admitted having an extramarital affair but denied reports of multiple affairs. Bethabili Lamini, the ANC Women's League president, dismissed allegations by the trade union body COSATU that she was behind the leaks. According to her spokesperson, Bethabile was not technically capable of accessing Ramaphosa's emails. The online publication also reports the political analysts are predicting that more damning allegations about Ramaphosa will follow. Now, Uganda's opposition leader, Dr. Kizza Besigye, has in the meantime lauded Kenya's Supreme Court following the nullification of President Uhuru Kenyatta's re-election. Besigye petitioned the country's Supreme Court in 2001 and again in 2006 when he said the elections had been stolen in President Museveni's favor. On both occasions, the court agreed with him on many of the grounds, although the court then ruled that the violations do not substantially affect the results. He spoke to our broadcasting partners and BS Uganda. Here's the interview. Take a look.
Retired Colonel Kizza Besigye, a 4-time loser in Uganda's presidential elections and one who also petitioned the Supreme Court twice over his loss, chose to monitor the Kenyan Supreme Court ruling from his Katonga office.
That's the foundation.
With his face lit up after the ruling, Colonel Kizza Besigye said if the constitution and electoral laws were violated, then the court had acted absolutely well.
The primacy of the constitution and the laws of a country. You know, a country must, and all people must take their constitution as inviolable. If you touch the constitution, then you have touched everybody.
Asked whether he envisages a similar scenario in Uganda, Besigye said it is almost impossible, but added that this should serve as a lesson to Uganda, especially the conduct of the judiciary and other institutions, saying the Kenyan situation did not come easily.
For example, judges are not simply appointed and vetted in private. The public actually participates in vetting the judges of Kenya. The vetting process is public. Here in Uganda, judges are appointed by the president. They are vetted by a committee of parliament. The committee of parliament vets them in camera, in secret, not in public. The committee of parliament has majority from Mr. Museveni's party.
Regarding the issue of technology and how it played in the Kenyan election petition, Besigye says all this can only be useful with reputable election and judicial officers.
So you need good expertise, you need good checks and balances, you need good institutions, and that is going to be one area that will continue to be a challenge.
He also took a swipe at election observers whom he says are not critical on important areas of election, but instead do what he calls election tourism.
First, an election is not just the event on polling day. You must observe the processes from way back because they are vital to what happens on the polling day.
Well, it's now time for a studio interview and have two individuals here who have a lot of experience as far as matters electoral processes is concerned. We have Peter Alingo with me here. Good evening, sir. Welcome to the program. Peter Alingo is a researcher at the Institute for Security Studies. And then we have Sam Kamau, who is a journalism lecturer at Aga Khan University. Many thanks, both of you, for joining us here. And we had a question earlier for our viewers, and we did ask them if they are confident that electoral outcomes, in Africa represent the popular will of the people. We've had our own share of problems here in Kenya. We are going for another election. Do you think electoral bodies in Africa are compromised?
You could look at this in both ways. I think the answer depends on each and every circumstance that you're dealing with, each and every country that you're dealing with. But what is important is the infrastructure that lays down the basic frame for the conduct and management of elections, particularly in relation to the appointment of electoral management bodies. We have various ways through which electoral management bodies are configured. We see quite often that, look, we have a process that is centered through the government. So we have bodies that are configured through a government-owned and initiated process. So then we end up with a government-appointed body. We also have situations where we have moved away from that so that independence is then seen in the manner in which the electoral management bodies are configured. I think the bottom line is that we would like to see an electoral commission that is configured in a manner that enshrines its independence. Yes. And it is that independence that is critical in the management and conduct of elections insofar as the delivery of elections that are credible, that have a sense of integrity, that are free and fair are concerned. Yes. So electoral management bodies ought to be configured in a way that safeguards and promotes their independence. And in the functions that they discharge in terms of managing elections and conducting electoral processes, they need to fiercely, and I repeat the word, fiercely protect and ensure that that independence is seen in their work. And that is the hallmark of all this. Yes. But we have seen situations in Africa where there have been attempts by particularly those who hold the tools and machinery of power, particularly the incumbent,
and of course, there are those who are saying that these electoral bodies almost every time reflect what these leaders want. But for now, Sam, before I come to you, joining us in this conversation is also Nicholas Sengomba, who is a governance expert on is an expert on governance and is going to join us shortly from Uganda. And Actually, he's there with us. Now, Nicholas, you've had views from Peter here, and I would like to hear your reaction towards this conversation as well. And it's a question that we've already asked our viewers. Do you think electoral outcomes in Africa represent the will of the voters themselves?
Thank you very much. First of all, I'm not really an expert on governance. I am a columnist with the Daily Monitor on political issues. Back to your question. The question you ask, does it reflect the will of the people? Yes and no, but in most cases, the majority in fact, it doesn't happen because of the structure of most of the political situation in Africa. There are so many poor people. The systems are not developed, you know. There's no electricity in most of these places. The media that is supposed to report on these issues and play an oversight role is really quite weak. Then there's a high-handedness from the ruling parties, the government, the police, the army. We've seen this, especially, particularly in elections in Uganda, and this we've had this in most of the judgments, wherever we've had the petitions, whether it is for the presidential or even for the other levels. So it does not really reflect the will of the people in general, you know, except in what we call the democracies that have tried to modernize places like South Africa, Botswana, or even Ghana. But in the majority, not really. It's not. We are not yet there.
Apologize for giving a different title there. Now, Sam, those who are saying the most critical moment in the electoral process, you know, when people go out there and vote, is during the counting and the transmission stage. And that is where the independence of this electoral body normally questioned.
Allow me first to go back to the general question whether elections, reflect the will of the people. And I would want to look at it from a historical point of view and say that there has been progress in the sense that if you remember the leaders, the founding fathers, most of them actually saw themselves as life presidents. But I think we have seen the shift or the growth from a single party era as we came into multi-party democracy. And we know that the initial elections under multi-party democracy again were hotly contested, but mostly the incumbents retained the power. What we have seen over time in Africa, actually 88% of the times the incumbents normally retain power. So you've had a situation where you have elections with basically no change. But we have also seen further progress, especially in West Africa, which would consider more democratic part of Africa, where we have actually seen incumbents losing and conceding.
Case in point, Ghana and Nigeria as well.
Exactly. So that shows that there has actually been some growth. Largely, of course, there are still some presidents still today who see themselves as life presidents. And cumulatively, if you are to combine their years, some of them have been in power for more than 35 years. In other cases, others is 30. It's a worrying trend. But on the positive side, and if you look at the case of some countries now like Kenya, where elections are more contested, and we can see it's always, the outcome is not always clear until, of course, we have the particular elections. Now, coming to the issue you are talking about, we know that, like it has been said, elections is not just the event on that particular day. It is the whole process. And there we are talking about free media. We are talking about the systems that are working. We are talking about the electoral management bodies being there. Therefore, it does not just narrow down to voting and then the counting and declaration of the results. But we have seen, and as we saw in the Kenyan scenario, is where the voting was seamless. And even the counting, to an extent, was actually okay. The dispute arose in terms of the tallying and, of course, transmission and the final declaration. And I think that is part of the challenges we have seen. But I have to say, in the Kenyan scenario, the 1988 Mlolongo system was chaotic. 1992, there was some progress, but in a sense, of course, we know what happened in that particular election. 1997, there was further progress, but there were still petitions and contestations around that. 2002, which is regarded as maybe the most democratic election in Kenya, where we saw actually an expression of the will of the people manifesting at the ballot. 2007, I think we all know history. 2013 we made some progress, but there are issues that came up. And what we did now with the 2017 election is to try and mend some of the loopholes that we saw through the law and administrative processes, which means then, like I'm saying, as we continue holding more elections, we are making progress. We are sealing loopholes, and maybe the next election in the 42 days could be better than we have had if we keep learning from our lessons.
Peter, I'm sure you'll agree with me, in most countries in Africa, whenever we have elections, it's always associated with tension. Even in Kenya, you know, when people talk about election, you know, it's supposed to be a moment when you're supposed to look up to it, you know, because you get an opportunity to change those who are in leadership. So, as much as you're going to comment on that, how important is it to have an electoral body that is independent?
I think at the heart of an elections really is the manager. And that is so important that if you don't have a manager that can live to the expectations, particularly in terms of discharging its mandate as laid down by either the constitutional framework or the legislative framework that relates to elections, then you have a problem. Because it is that manager that will ensure that you have an election that is of quality, that measures to standards, that speaks to the dictates of the Constitution and the electoral legislations that we have. And two, most importantly, I think, picking from my colleague, the democratic governance trajectory in Africa is showing some steady growth. And that is a positive trend that we have seen in the continent. And we see now that the African nations have now adopted constitutions and election laws and practice that ensures periodicity of elections, that elections are becoming a matter of culture and practice in the context of our constitutional order and practice in Africa. That is a plus for Africa. I think Africa now needs to begin to focus on the aspects in terms of the socio-political and economic dynamics and context within which elections are held. Because all these have an interplay and have an impact on the quality of the process, including the outcome. Then the infrastructure for elections themselves. That infrastructure also includes the critical institutions that play a role, particularly the electoral management body. And therefore, it is important that whenever we are having elections, we now have to move towards a system or an environment where we can have a manager of elections, the electoral management bodies, that are truly impartial, neutral, professional, efficient, accountable, and transparent. I think these are the most critical things. That once we have an environment where the electoral management body then demonstrates these particular critical features in its embodiment and in its functional capacity, then we do not need to worry, because we then are sure that they are up to the task and can deliver an election that is both qualitative, that passes both the qualitative test and the quantitative tests.
And I think this is where I need to drag Nicholas into a conversation once again. Nicholas is still in Uganda there. Now, Nicholas, you've heard there from Peter, there's some sort of gradual growth in democracy in most African countries. Can that be said of Uganda?
Yes, of Uganda it can be said, because we've had, if you look at the history of the country right from independence in '62, subsequent elections that we've held, we are getting closer and closer. At least, if not in content, well, it is in form. We hold the elections, the campaigns. You have all these, some sort of education. And then everything, most of the ingredients that you have in a proper election. Now, the most critical part of it is the quality of the elections is where you have a great problem. And that one is a point where we have to engage in very, very deep thinking. One of the most important things, and where you've had growth in democracy, one of the most important and critical factors has been the character and the personal will of especially those holding the reins of power at that particular moment. If you look back at Kenya, for instance, in 2002, there are very many people who rejoiced when Daniel Arap Moi was leaving. It was like good riddance. But had it not been for Moi accepting and submitting to the will of the people, it's my time to go, my two-term limit is up, you know, I should not play, you know, hardball like many other people, you know, I still have work to, those sort of things. It helps the growth. Now, when you look at a country like Uganda, we still have very, very, very many challenges. The laws are quite good. You have a body that runs the election, but you still have the head of state being in charge of appointing the commissioners. And then you have like the unfortunate utterances that you've had in Kenya, for instance, what happened President Uhuru Kenyatta and the Vice President over the weekend, the sort of asinine remarks they were making about the judges, you know, calling them wakora or crooks. You know, in Uganda, you've had similar situations where the president, after an election, says, "Had I been, had my opponent won, I wouldn't have given up." You have situations where members of the military say that we have chosen, this is our candidate, and things like that. So, you have the bodies in place. You have very many, but the will and that to submit to the law, to submit to the dictates of democracy. If those are not present, if you don't have that goodwill, then most of these other things, you know, will turn the whole process into a farce, you know. So Uganda still has that challenge that you don't seem to have people who really believe that it's very, very important that if the people have decided, then we follow, even if the decision is not palatable to you. And I have seen that with the utterances, like I said, the president of Kenya. Now, if you look at, I'll give you another instance with the Ugandan situation. You still have, in the last few years before the last election in 2016, the civil society and members of the opposition especially went around the country getting the views of the people on particular reforms that people would need to give us better elections, quality elections. And at the end of the day, most of these were not adopted. For instance, when there was a call for an independent electoral commission, what actually happened was that we just added the word independent to the electoral commission, you know, and that is just form. That is not the substance. The substance was, how do we come with a situation where, with a system where we vet and we get commissioners who are really independent of the government in power, the appointing authority, and we have not yet seen that. So we still have those challenges. Then you've also had utterances. For instance, if the current Minister of Justice and Constitutional Affairs, Honorable Kaindo Tafire, he's on record for claiming on one of the radio stations that Uganda, before the current government came to power in '86, actually had no courts, no judges, which is not true. And then in his final analysis, he said that he who gives can take away. So if you have a situation where you have not yet agreed on the formation and the independence of the referee, which is the electoral body, and then the arbiter in the final analysis, the courts, are not really standing on firm ground because of these sort of utterances and the attitudes that have been that the governors have, then you still have a challenge and a long way to go. So it's very difficult for you to come out and allege that and claim that you have the managers running the election and will give you an outcome which represents the will of the people.
Thank you very much, Nicholas, for that comprehensive analysis. That was Nicholas Sengomba of the Daily Monitor coming to us from Kampala, Uganda. Of course, we're going to shortly talk about that ruling by the Supreme Court, ruling that has been described as groundbreaking, that those who have described it as unprecedented, a watershed moment for Kenya's democracy. And now, after that ruling, the IEBC has already declared that the rerun is going to be on 17th of October. We just have 43 days to go. And still in studio, we have Peter Lingo as well as Sam Kamau. We're going to continue with our conversation. But first, let's take a very short break. Then we'll be coming back right after that.